Hi everyone, I'm doing research on the anatomic hemispherectomy, its history, side effects, and variations. So I'll do a quick once-over of my table of contents. First, I'll go over the author, me. I'll give you some details about myself. Next, we'll go over the introduction, so my specific topic area of investigation, and then we'll go over current relevant research, my methodology, which will be my data analysis and results, the conclusions I've made, and my experiences throughout this research project. So first, about the author. The title of my presentation is The Anatomic Hemispherectomy, History, Side Effects, and Variations. My name is Pratiksha Raghuram. If you didn't catch that earlier, I'm in the 10th grade at J.L. Main High School in South Carolina, and I have a passion for neuroscience, and which is particularly why I was very excited about this program. Introduction. So this is my research question. What are the risks and functional outcomes associated with the use of the anatomic hemispherectomy surgical technique as a way to eliminate epileptic seizures? And I know that sounded like a mouthful, but let me break it down. So the topic that I'm investigating is epilepsy surgery techniques, specifically the anatomic hemispherectomy. In my paper, I wanted to emphasize the surgical side effects and outcomes of it, particularly because a lot of patients who need this surgery don't get it out of fear of the implications of what this surgery actually entails. So the anatomic hemispherectomy is a surgical technique used to remove an entire hemisphere of your brain, which is the hemisphere where the most neuronal activity occurs that leads to seizures. Seizures are just the misfiring of neurons. So for people with severe epilepsy, they might undergo this procedure to remove that entire hemisphere so that they can be able to function in their daily lives without seizures or with a drastic reduction of the number of seizures they have on a day-to-day basis. The objective of my paper is to summarize the purpose and the outcomes of the anatomic hemispherectomy. And I find this particularly important because a lot of people might be intimidated by the fact that you're removing an entire hemisphere. You might think, there is no way that I'll be the same person after. And there is a chance for that to happen, but it's actually a much safer technique than popularly believed. So literature review. So current relevant research, currently there's research going into different solutions for certain postoperative complications. For example, the success rate of shunts for hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus is a condition that occurs after the surgery, which is basically a buildup of cerebral spinal fluid in the residing cavity, as you can see here. So doctors use a further surgical technique of using a shunt, which basically just drains that fluid. And there's research being done regarding the success rate and how useful it actually is. There is also research going into the potential effects on cognitive function. So for example, the efficiency of neuroplastic development in infants. So infants, that is patients 2 years or younger who receive this hemispherectomy, show not a lot of cognitive difference in ability with other adolescents their age once they've grown up, because neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to regenerate neurons and kind of take over for the neurons that it's lost in that missing hemisphere over here, because of this ability of neuroplasticity, they're able to make up for it in no time at all, and they are able to cognitively function like anyone else their age. There is also research going into the potential effects on motor function. So, for example, the occurrences of hemiplegia or weak limbs. So, hemiplegia is paralysis, basically. My methodology. So, data analysis, I obtained my data through secondary literature review, and I compared and contrasted various trusted sources. So, I used sources such as Pediatric Epilepsy Alliance Organization, the National Institute of Health, Mayo Clinic, etc. The results that I've kind of gotten from all of that research is that the anatomic hemispherectomy has transformed a lot throughout its development. For instance, its mortality rate. When it was first discovered in the 1930s, there was a high mortality rate from about 32 to 40%. But today, it's only 2 to 7%, which is a drastic change in just a little less than a century. Side effects are also minimized through medications and further surgical treatment. So as I mentioned before, for hydrocephalus, they can use shunts to kind of drain all the cerebral spinal fluid away. And for superficial hemosiderosis, you can use a choroid plexus cauterization. So they're going through the different medications and surgical treatments to kind of minimize all of the effects that come with that certain people may experience once they receive the anatomic hemispherectomy. And then there have also been effective variations of this technique that have been derived. So for example, this is a diagram of the functional hemispherectomy. So where the anatomic variation would remove this entire hemisphere right here, the functional hemispherectomy only removes certain portions or certain tissues, or even sometimes it's really just poking holes in the tissue to kind of disrupt the neuronal activity in the area to kind of reduce and minimize seizure occurrence. The reason why certain doctors tend to shy away from the functional hemispherectomy is because leaving portions of the hemisphere remaining or intact could possibly provide a space for the epilepsy to kind of come back and reside in. So there's a bit of leeway when it comes to that, and a bit of debate versus the different variations of it. So my conclusion is I restate my research question about the risks and functional outcomes associated with this technique. Contribution is that I've got a data-backed conclusion that it's a very safe and effective procedure, and that many adults fear that if they take this procedure, that since they don't have the same neuroplastic abilities as some like adolescents and infants, that they will be cognitively or cognitively impaired or have motor functions severely debilitated, and oftentimes that's not the case. So it's very important to make this conclusion that is a very safe and effective procedures. Some limitations I faced was when I was trying to compare the anatomic hemispherectomy to other surgical techniques, for example, the corpus callosotomy, which is a technique that severs the bond between each hemisphere. I wasn't able to find a lot of data comparing surgical techniques, so that made it a little more difficult when I wanted to compare and contrast. But besides that, I was able to get pretty straightforward data, and a lot of sources were able to help me with my research. So my experiences in this research project. So I had expert help. Thank you to Professor Rajali and Professor Virgil for their help and continuous support in this paper. Professor Rajali has been very supportive and has been letting me know about the different ways that I can expand upon my topic in the different avenues that I can cover when I discuss this in my research paper. And Professor Virgil has been very helpful in like formatting and how to write things and cite my information and all of that. Some struggles I faced was definitely organization of data and composing an outline and actually writing the paper. When I started my research, I actually started with a completely different topic, but it was through filtering out the data I was actually able to find that I ultimately landed upon the anatomic hemispherectomy. And I've gotten so much information that it's actually been a little difficult to corral all of that into coherent sections in my paper. So, and my favorite part is definitely the research, because it is so cool. It's so interesting to be able to do research on this and discover these different surgical techniques that I never even knew about before to treat very common symptoms of epilepsy, the seizure. And I think that's really cool. So yes, that is my presentation. If anyone has any questions, thank you.
Big round of applause. You can stop sharing. Pratiksha, you're very articulate, very passionate, and you really put your heart and soul into this, and it shows. Okay, great job. Keep it going. And everybody, this is just the beginning. It's not going to end today. It's not going to end on 31st. You have to continue with that. And we've had students who leveraged this research to get better opportunities, which is like internships in MIT, to land in Stanford and everything. So that's what colleges are looking for. Someone who's passionate, who shows intellectual curiosity. They're, of course, outcome oriented. They want to see an outcome that's tangible and measurable. So that's what you're doing here. You are the top 1% because you're doing something that 99% of the students are not doing. So great job, Pratiksha. Question from Dr. Prahlad.
Pratiksha, so you started this with a small idea about the procedure, right? But I want to know what surprised you during your research. And okay, so how do you want to study that further?
So originally, when I began my research, I had wanted to do research into the corpus callosotomy. I mentioned it briefly in my presentation, and basically the risks of it for children, since it was a procedure mainly used for children. The anatomic hemispherectomy is more widely used for both adults and children. If I could research this further, I would definitely want to explore the specific cognitive differences between adolescents of a certain age range, because I mentioned in my slideshow that because of the ability for infants and their incredible rate of neuroplasticity, they're able to kind of make up for that lost half of their brain, and they're able to kind of make up for it and function at the same levels as their peers. But I would want to perform like IQ tests or memory tests or something like that to see if there is any noticeable difference between the patients who have taken the anatomic hemispherectomy and just children who have not.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wonderful, Pratiksha. And I want to thank you for spending the Sunday evening here. Amazing.